May the grace and peace of God be with you all, dear friends, and welcome. Welcome as we gather to give thanks to God for the blessings poured out in and through the life of George Michael Rapport. Gathered here from the many and varied strands of George's extraordinary life, you come as beloved family and cherished friends to grieve his absence and to bear witness to the richness of his life, and to engage in that particular work of remembering, to find healing in what Frederick Buechner once called the still room within each of us, where all the past lives on as a part of the present, where those lost to us continue to live in our memory, and in the tears and the laughter, where the weight of absence finds balance in the still present sense of joy found in remembrance of a life lived fully and richly and well. In this space and this time made sacred by the presence of God, we come to remember, to be drawn together once again into the great story of George's rich and enriching life, to be blessed by his memory and to find peace in remembrance, and to celebrate together the abundance of love and grace poured out in his living. On behalf of his family, we extend our thanks to you for being present today and for all the ways that you have been present to them through this time and present to George throughout his long and wonderful life. And we invite you to join them for a reception immediately following our service today at the Madison Beach Club. And now our service opens with the singing of our first hymn, Joyful, Joyful, We Adore You, which you will find on page 2 of our blue chalice hymnal. We invite you to rise in your seats or in spirit and lend your voice to this great celebration of joy. Please be seated. I invite you to join me now in sharing the words of our call to worship, which you will find printed in your bulletin. Sing to the Lord a new song.
Sing to the Lord, all the earth.
Sing to the Lord a new song. In the fullness of joy and in the depth of sorrow, for all that blesses the course of life, let the people of God give thanks for love, enduring and eternal.
Sing to the Lord a new song, all the earth. Let joy and thanksgiving abound. Let love endure and mercy everlasting reach all life.
And now let us gather our hearts as we share in the words of our opening prayer of invocation. Holy God, unto whom all hearts are open, all desires known, all grief shared, grant us the comfort and solace of your peace this day, as we gather to give thanks for the life of George Michael Rapport. Gracious God, before whom generations rise and pass away, may your light shine through the shadows of this hour, to comfort hearts saddened by loss, and to open to all hearts your eternal promise of healing, wholeness, and peace. Amen. In the course of life, there are times when we turn from our own words and call upon older, more ancient and durable wisdom to give expression to all we bring to times of parting. Prose and poetry that give shape to our remembrance of a loved one past. At this time, I invite George's wife, Jane, to come forward and share a word of verse.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here for us. Death is nothing at all. I have only slipped away into the next room. I am I, and you are you. Whatever we were to each other, that we are still. Call me by my own familiar name. Speak to me in the easy way you always used. Put no difference into your tone. Wear no forced air of solemnity or sorrow. Laugh as we always laughed, at the little jokes we always enjoyed together. Play, smile, think of me, pray for me. Let my name be ever the household word that it always was. Let it be spoken without effort, without the ghost of a shadow in it. Life means all that it ever was. There is absolute, unbroken continuity. What is death but a negligible accident? Why should I be out of mind? Because I am out of sight. I am waiting for you for an interval, somewhere very near, just around the corner. All is well. Nothing is past. Nothing is lost. One brief moment, and all will be as it was before. How we shall laugh at the trouble of parting when we meet again. I will miss you, Rabs. I love you.
And from George's great company of friends, we now invite Ginny Vansel to come forward and share a word from the Psalms. Ginny will be followed by Bill Rogers with a reading from 1 Corinthians.
Good morning. The 118th Psalm is commonly read in liturgies of the Russian Orthodox Church. We share this selection of verses in honor and recognition of the faith and tradition of George's family. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever. Let those who revere the Lord say, his steadfast love endures forever. Out of my distress I called to the Lord, and the Lord answered me and set me in a broad place. The Lord is on my side to help me. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to put confidence in mortals. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to put confidence in princes. Open to me the gates of righteousness, that I may enter through them and give thanks to the Lord. This is the gate of the Lord, and the righteous shall enter through it. Blessed is the one that comes in the name of the Lord. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad of it.
Good morning. The family has chosen for this reading Paul's first letter to the church in Corinth. And at that point in time, the church in Corinth was not doing so well, so the entire letter is some advice to them. This particular chapter is on the importance of love. And as I read on it and reflected on it, I think you would agree with me that George lived by this and believed in this. For not once did I ever see George mad or angry in the over 35 years that I have known him. I apologize. There is something that comes to mind. This is the only time that I remember. It was Nicholas's senior year in high school, and Nicholas was debating whether to go into the Marine Corps after high school or to college. I don't think he was having that debate, but that's what the discussion was. So George and Jane asked me to drive up here to Madison and talk to Nicholas about the importance of college, maybe an ROTC program. And I thought we were all on board. George and Jane had been to lunch. They came back. They sat down and said, "Nicholas, what do you think?" And Nicholas looked right at his father and he said, "Dad, I think you're right. I should go to college first, and I would like to go to the Citadel." And George looked at him. His face was beet red, and he said, "The Citadel. The Citadel." And he went on to a 10-minute tirade about the differences between VMI and the Citadel. That's the only time. Paul's first letter to Corinthians, chapter 13, the importance of love. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am noisy going or changing cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove all mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all that I have, and I deliver my body to be burned, but have not loved, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful. It is not arrogant or rude. Love does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrong, but rejoices in the right. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For our knowledge is imperfect and our prophecy is imperfect, but when the perfect comes, the imperfect will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part that I shall understand fully, even as have been fully understood. So faith, hope, love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love.
Now we enter our time of remembrances. And if you knew George at all in the last 40 years, you knew two dominant institutions reigned over much. One of them was the Chase Manhattan Bank. The other was Jane. My father, Richard Grant, was his dear companion through much of that journey. And so our remembrances begin this morning with Richard Grant.
George Rapport was a dear friend of mine for almost 50 years. We met in the mid-1970s. We were both junior officers in the Syphilis Brigade of David Rockefeller's Chase Manhattan Bank. There's no L in that. George became a vice president of the international department in Paris, wheeling and dealing with large French oil companies, snazzy sovereign borrowings, and some other things. And as George would say, living off the golden threads of expat benefits. George flourished. George had a love of history, especially military history. And being a romantic, of course, George was a sailor. It was racing a J-24 in New York Harbor that George and Jane Hilton found a bond. It was a bond that was never broken. Pardon me, just came off a lunch with John Boehner. So Michael and Alan Rapport can relate as teenagers, sailing with George in his Moody 34 from Antwerp up the North Sea to the Baltic Sea and to Helsinki and back. A bit long side of those of us who are usually nipping up to Block Island. I can hear George's voice as they pass through the North Sea waters off Jutland in western Denmark. 'Twas 1916 in this Jutland area of the North Sea. The British Admiral Jellicoe waited for this fleet of dreadnoughts and Royal Navy ships of the line. Coming out of the Baltic was the Prussian Vice Admiral Scheer to engage the Royal Navy and break the blockade, and so forth and so on. There's typical speculation of George on what could be. What if Jellicoe had skipped high tea and not withdrawn in the final encounter with Vice Admiral Scheer of the Kriegsmarine? What if Pickett had charged the Union flanks and not the center? How would different decisions have affected either war or beyond? George enjoyed analyzing abstract possibilities. George would share his Vietnam experiences, not of receiving and then returning artillery barrages, but of sitting on a muddy log in the Jolly Green Giant eating cold fried eggs out of a can while bringing freedom and democracy to unwelcoming people. He was never bitter about that, never resentful. George was never that way. He lived and chose to live a happier life. George liked the construct of a hometown. He favored having roots. Madison became his hometown, and rightly so, as he connected with much of the social history of Madison. I have two examples of how inevitable George's assumption into the Madison collectivity was. He went to grammar school in Japan after the war, and later he attended the 50-year alumni reunion in San Francisco. He ran into a friend from early in the school years in Japan. She was from Madison, Connecticut, went to Hand High, and along the way took up with a then married Hand classmate. George came home anxious to share that community coincidence learned so many years later and so far away. The coda of that is that next husband had been married at the time to my cousin. Being a history buff, George had accumulated a very fine and rare sword collection, which living in Manhattan, he stored in the attic of an East Hampton friend. Friend had a deadbeat brother who stole the collection, and as George was able to discover, sold to a dealer in antique military items, and that dealer lived in Madison, Connecticut. He called me and asked me if I knew this fellow. Well, yes, I've known him since 1950. And he was a member of the Madison Beach Club. Yet another brick uniting George with his hometown of Madison. George was destined to retire in Madison. He was connected. It was home. And Madison, Connecticut became a better place for it. A reader, a sailor, a chef, and more, but most worthy, a fine fellow with great insight, great wit, and a rock-solid respect for the dignity of every individual soul on this planet. No matter wealth, health, education, culture, spiritual belief structures, or other depths, George Rapport held an unassailable insistence for respecting the spiritual nature and commonalities of all people. The 19th century author Ambrose Bierce labeled cynics as disillusioned idealists. George was an idealist, but he never became a cynic. And so George Rapport, my dear friend for half a century, may your spirits find fair winds, following seas, and a gentle mist enveloping your bows.
To know George most certainly was to follow the adventures, the discoveries, and the great love that he had for his three sons. And so each of them will share some of their own memories, beginning with Michael.
Hello, I'm Michael. I'm George's eldest and oldest son, and this is my brother Alan. I'll be speaking for both of us. In pace decus, in bello presidium. In peace, a glorious asset. In war, a tower of strength. The motto of the Virginia Military Institute, of which our father was a very proud graduate, also encapsulates his very essence as a father, husband, and a much-loved friend to many, many people. He always knew, he always asked about us. He was there to support us, and to support us he most certainly did. in such myriad ways that we cannot list them here. We are a scattered family, even cosmopolitan. But Dad was always there, morally, supportively, even when we weren't physically together. If trouble found us, as trouble sometimes does to all of us, he was there, ready, able to help, a stable tower of strength. Liebens, Vollens, Potens was a rather cheeky slogan across one of his t-shirts. Ready, willing, and able. This was more than just jocular, because he most certainly was all those things. It was not just that Dad was open-minded, well-traveled, sociable. He was most certainly all those things. But he's also strongly ethical, principled, striving always to do the right thing. And he had a remarkable acceptance of difference. An example. It's safe to say that in our family, I think we have a diversity of political opinions. And the fact is, Dad loved that. He would describe himself sometimes, in the lighter moments of our political discussions, as to the right of Attila the Hun. And in return, he would sometimes describe Alan and I as socialists or communists. I think he was joking, wasn't he? Yes. The point is that he loved a good, deep conversation. We cannot count the number of occasions that we sat late into the night, wherever it was, often, more often than not, with wine or whiskey, hammering out our divergent, often conflicting points of view. And even when it became heated, it was never ever described, none of us ever described it as an argument. It was always a discussion, okay? He taught us from a very young age that people can and should differ ideologically, engage and challenge each other's views, all while enjoying each other's company, friendship, or love, and learn from our differences. And this came in supporting us in our life choices too. The fact that Dad repeatedly, as we grew, told us that we could do anything, be anything you wanted to be. Go ahead and be a truck driver. He would support us in it. But that whatever we chose to do, we applied ourselves 100% to it. Be the best truck driver you can be. And this speaks loudly about who he was, about his love, about his integrity. For example, he supported Alan through art school, having made very sure that Alan understood that a career in art is not necessarily the path to great riches and financial security. But once Alan made that choice, he supported him all the way through. He was firing on all cylinders with that support. Whatever decisions we made, so long as they were informed choices and that decision made, we committed ourselves to it fully and did the best we can. At Alan's first art show in Orlando, Dad raced down with Nicholas. Nicholas apparently leapt over the bar and started serving people's drink. Nick was 13 at the time. But they knew it was an important day, and Dad knew it was an important day for Alan, and he wanted to be there to support Alan. Nothing was sold. Sorry about that. But that Dad was there was far more rewarding. All of this reflects his unyielding and unconditional love for us as a father. And the fact that all three of us have widely divergent career paths is a testament to this man who raised us all to follow our own path, not one assumed because of his. And it also reflects his embrace of knowledge and understanding. In the many messages of love that my wife Helen and I have received on our side of the Atlantic, one of the many beautiful remarks we received from Helen's family and our friends is that Dad was a polymath. He got to know quite a lot of people over there because he came to this bacchanalia many years ago, which some people remember as the day that Helen and I got married. He loved science, mathematics, history, archaeology, the classics, art, architecture, economics. He wrote 2 novels, none of which he never published or tried to publish, for the sheer pleasure of writing. One based on his Vietnam War experiences, the other on the Fetterman Massacre. He spoke the most beautiful language in the world, which, as everyone knows, is French. This is far from an exhaustive list, but two in particular have left Alan and I with particularly fond memories and shaped who we are. First, Dad's love of classical music. And he transmitted that to us. One of the leitmotifs of our time with Dad, wherever it was and whenever it was cooking with him while Albinoni, Bach, Corelli, Pachelbel played in the background. And one time when Alan asked him about one particular cassette, the reply came, Couperin, that's heavy, pick something lighter. This, of course, naturally stimulated Alan to go and find out who Couperin was, and Couperin is now one of Alan's favorite composers. He exposed us to our first live opera, Stravinsky's Rake's Progress in London. Stravinsky. We were 12 and 14 respectively. Stravinsky. And Alan actually feels some rumbling guilt pangs these days because he retaliated by forcing Dad and Jane to sit through an Alban Berg opera at the Met. It was Lulu, wasn't it? It was Lulu. 3.5 hours of it, of 12-tone opera. But then again, once you smacked a pony on its rump, you never know where it's going to end up. Secondly, cooking. Making pilmeni, our grandmother's Siberian dumplings with him, and actually all of us together, have left us with a treasury of very happy memories. Dad wasn't afraid to tackle anything, from whole suckling pig to cow tongue soaked with milk and then peeled regularly before you roasted it. That freaked both of us out. Just seeing that, to elegant pastas. His pastas were amazing. And complicated roasts. Dad encouraged us to be open-minded, to try everything at least once, including Rocky Mountain oysters, which we eventually did together in Montana on a trip enabled by Jane. And in our cooking, he gave us the confidence to prepare the ambitious, the complex, and occasionally the strange. He instilled a curiosity in us that carries us through to this day. As my bride Helen has pointed out, Dad has 3 sons who are an historian, an artist who runs his own business, a marine, and a scientist. This is more than just chance, but a reflection of the man he was, and I'm a weightlifter too. Dad loved not just to ask questions, but to share what he found. And he did freely, joyfully, enthusiastically. He loved to embrace new experiences. He sought to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Whether he was eating giant land snails in Nigeria, this is true, or running the New York Marathon with Jane, or sailing around the Chesapeake Bay with Jane. Ask Helen about one particularly wonderful occasion. Or in the 1980s, sailing along through the Jutta Canal in Sweden, across the Baltic through the Åland Islands to Finland and back. The most challenging part of which was not rough seas, the notorious Nordic mosquitoes, or anything like that, but the fact that he did it with 2 gangly teenage boys. For Dad, this is not just about the adventure. It was about sharing the experience and the knowledge and the embrace of life with those he loved. As a parent, one of the best pieces of advice Dad gave me when Nick was little was that the key to good parenting was to give your children almost enough rope to hang themselves with, but not quite. And this is it. He put us first, all of us, and he never, ever asked for anything in return. As a parent myself, Dad makes me want to be a better parent to my daughters. We are all touched by his love, his generosity of spirit, his kindness, his tolerance, his humanity. Was like us, the Scots sometimes ask jocularly of themselves. Who's like us? Well, there's none like that. Mi te bien voulu, nous t'aimons. We love you, Dad.
Nicholas.
My name is Nick Rapport, and I am George's youngest son. I want to start off by thanking all of you for being here today to celebrate my father's life. It means so much to me and my family to feel the love and support that all of you have given us today and over the past week after my father's passing. I also want to thank my mom, Jane, for being there for me during this time and for caring for Dad during the past few years. When I think of my dad, many thoughts and memories come to mind, but I think primarily of three ideals that he lived by: that of intelligence, passion, and honor. Intelligence. My father was, and forever will be, the most intelligent man I have ever met. Some of my earliest memories are of Christmas morning and all of us opening gifts, with Dad opening the inevitable new research book on black holes or some long-lost physics theory, which some poor college student would probably suffer through. But Dad would read on the toilet in the morning and would remember every word. My childhood bedtime stories reflected this as well. The Odyssey was our book of choice, not Cat in the Hat or Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. He was a true Renaissance man of every sense of the word, a master in as many fields as anyone could list. He was classical, not just due to his choice of music. Tony Vivaldi was also a staple in my childhood, but in every way. I remember when I turned 16 and I got my learner's permit, and Dad pulling me aside and saying, "Nico, you're gonna learn on a stick shift, and you're not gonna even try an automatic until you don't stall." Those lessons on a downslope of the steepest hill in Madison, I look at fondly now. Back then, I think we probably had a few of Michael's aforementioned discussions. I'll always remember him as the classically intelligent man he was. Passion. Dad was passionate about every single thing that he did, a trait that I try each and every day to embody myself. He taught me from a young age that whatever you start, you finish to the best of your ability. Perhaps my favorite instance of this, albeit humorous, also fell on one Christmas, when I, a young 6-year-old, felt that the most important part of the meal that was going to be served was, of course, a neon blue bear ice cream cake. I remember looking in the grocery store in Port Chester, New York, in the freezer aisle, and seeing the bear sitting there. Dad said, "If we get this, no one else is gonna eat it, so you're gonna have to finish it." Christmas dinner came, and when the dessert was brought, his words rang true. No one else ate the cake. He sat next to me, and I can still hear him in my ear. "You wanted it, and God damn it, you're gonna eat it." Through tears and bellyaches, I did. I ate that whole damn bear. But he remained there by my side through it all. One thing I learned that Christmas is whatever I start, I finish. Whether that's a cake or my doctorate program, I see it through, and that I credit my father for. Sorry, by the way, to the clergy for the language. Wouldn't be true to my dad to omit some choice phrases. Honor. Honor for family, country, and community. My dad was the most honorable man anyone would be lucky to meet. He grew up in war-torn Manila, born to a white Russian family with a history so fascinating, I could go on for hours alone. His parents were an amazing pair. His father, Nikolai, a Cossack officer who served in World War I and the Russian Revolution, and my grandmother, Tatiana, a woman who herself was a warrior in her own right. Nikolai was tragically lost in the street fighting that plagued the city when the US finally came to liberate the Philippines, leaving Tatiana and George to pick up the pieces, surviving on Spam, canned pineapple, and hope. This history Dad never forgot, but rather wore on his shoulder with pride and taught his 3 sons of as we came to an age of understanding. He, alongside Tatiana, would go on to find an amazing man in Grandpa, Michael Rapport, who gave him more than just a new last name, but also an opportunity to become the proud American that my father was. He would go on to attend what my dad would refer to as the finest military college in the country, VMI, sorry Bill, had to say it, and commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army Field Artillery. This legacy my father passed on to me, which I know brought him immense pride when I joined the Marine Corps as a cannoneer myself. I'll never forget telling my dad at the age of 16 that I was planning on joining the Marines. My dad was supportive, but as any VMI alum must do, he definitely had an opinion of a better route for me to go along. He loaded me into our Land Cruiser, and next thing I knew, we were going on a college tour, which consisted of a singular school visit. Next thing I knew, we were pulling into Lexington, Virginia, and walking the hallowed grounds of a school I already knew so well. After the tour and discussion with the admissions staff, I was still adamant about my decision, but instead of pushing his agenda, Dad embraced me and encouraged me every step of the way. I would like to finish with a story, not of my father, but of a place he knew. The story goes like this. One dark night, a group of soldiers gathered beside a fire. These soldiers were not just any type of grunt or sailor, but artillerymen. The section chief began asking the men if he knew of a place called Fiddler's Green. To his surprise, the men had not heard the story. Fiddler's Green, he said, was where they were all going, a place where artillerymen gather after their final battle with what we call life. Only redlegs are allowed entrance, and as you'd expect, the centerpiece for this holy place is not a church or a field, but a tavern. The drinks flow freely, and comrades gather and share tales and drink together for all time. It's a happy place, a place where men of a storied profession can finally rest and celebrate life's accomplishments. I count myself lucky that someday I will meet my dad there again. I love you, Dad, and until we meet again, I will make you proud.
Now we offer you a chance to gather your own thoughts as we listen to musical interlude Shenandoah.
Oh, Shenandoah, I long to hear you. Away, you rolling river. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to hear you. Away, I'm bound away across the wide Missouri. Oh, Shenandoah, I love your daughter. Away, your rolling river. Oh, Shenandoah, I love your daughter. Away, I'm bound away across the wide Missouri. Oh, Shenandoah,
across the wide Missouri. Away, I'm bound away across the wide Missouri.
Sons didn't leave me with a lot of new material to offer you folks. But it is amazing how a picture of this man comes together. George could talk about almost anything. And if you sat with him long enough, he would do it. He would cover the world, most of Western history, much of the history of technology. It was sort of like, I imagine, having dinner with Henry Kissinger. I probably spent the most time with him in the Gorbachev-Yeltsin years, and with George it was somehow easier to kind of periodize based on Russian strongmen than any other kind of biographical detail. Probably spent the most time, as I said, in the Gorbachev-Yeltsin years when George was still at the bank and well before they had moved to Madison. And even then, a conversation with George didn't really end. It just sort of reached a point where it had to stop for the evening. There was always more to be said. He was fascinating. And especially, he was fascinating when he really got going. On one occasion, I was with him and with Jane. I think I was about 25. And actually, Gorbachev and Yeltsin came up. I forget how. With George, of course, it did not matter how. The point was that George had thoughts. Thoughts which somehow then became a conversation about John Keegan's book, The Face of Battle, about which he also had thoughts. And then it was also a conversation about skiing at Closters, about which he really had thoughts. And there was a significant sidebar which I think was about Jacques Pepin. It sounds so scattershot now, but the thing of it was that in the moment, it all made sense. It was all one conversation. George had a mind that was like that. He loved connecting things, and he could not help but see connections, or in some moments maybe even talk them into life before your very eyes. And when he saw that you could follow, when he saw that you were one of the ones who could make the leaps with him, his eyes would widen. He would smile that, he had a lot of different smiles, but there was this one he had where the corners of his mouth actually kind of went down a little bit. He would sort of do that. And it was as if his joy was seemingly complete. And it was really then that he would go ahead and let her rip, that he would get on a roll. He didn't like losing an argument. And he didn't necessarily concede when he had for a while, but even so, what he loved more than agreeing or disagreeing, winning or losing, was the journey of minds that were alive, that were passionately curious, as he was so passionately curious. And for that kind of encounter, those kinds of moments, he had an almost infinite appetite. Alongside that profound curiosity and that wonderful openness were also a deep sense of pride and duty. And if curiosity was George's set of wings, then pride and duty were his anchors in the best sense. They were his ground. His deep love and grounding in his family involved profound affection, as you've heard, genuine enjoyment. They also involved loyalty to the past and to the future in a way that few might actually feel in quite the way that George did. Because for George, when it came to family, more broadly to identity, there was also history and also sacrifice. And for him, that was so because there had been sacrifice for him in the most immediate of ways. And he was not one either to forget or to permit forgetting. More than most of us do, George understood that we come on the scene in the midst of a story that is larger than we are, and to which we add what we add, and which we must then teach others to carry forward. As you've heard, his own biological father, a Russian immigrant, had died at the Battle of Manila in early 1945. For all George's travels, his accomplishments, an impeccable education, distinguished military service, international career, good living, George never forgot. Later in life, in fact, he discovered a cousin who led the reconstruction in Manila itself of a small memorial to his father and to many other civilians who had lost their lives on the same day. He connected, along with Jack, with someone who shared both roots and a sense of the importance of rootedness. Remarkably, so many years later, they had connected and in fact discovered that they both had scrapbooks full of photographs from 1930s Manila, some of them taken from different angles but of the same occasions. For George, these were the complement to photographs that his mother had kept from that same time. They were a long-lost aunt's photos of the same picnic, the same events that his mother had captured all those years ago. And I think the deepest point in that remarkable rediscovery is that for George, this was a profound confirmation of a kind of connection and a kind of responsibility to our roots that he had long felt and tried to live by. He was one who always wanted to stand up and to be counted because he knew how important it was to stand up and be counted. You did not need to explain to him about service or about seeking to discern what was right amid circumstances that could be murky at best. If anything, for George, it was the murkiness of any given moment that made the truth to be learned from it more powerful, more compelling, more inspiring, more important to get right. And it was important to George to get to the truth and to get it right. I'm biased, I suppose, but to me, George was somehow Napoleon Bonaparte, George Smiley, David Rockefeller, maybe even a little bit Leo Tolstoy, though not the collectivist part, all in one. his delight in his sons and his grandchildren, in the life that he got to build with Jane, was all maybe a little less complicated than his early chapters had been, and all the richer, especially in retirement, which was a time that he heartily enjoyed. His capacity for love was remarkable, especially for one who had known loss as closely as he did. And in the end, that's the thing about him that I most admire. He was erudite, he was voluble, dutiful, responsible, generous, ever inclined to embrace the difficult truth over the convenient wrong, but to be deeply loving having lost, and to be committed to learning how to be more loving when a superficial stoicism was a genuine option. That was George's own choice, and it was what he chose, not once, but time and time again. For we who remain, George's life teaches us that we may be gifted in any number of ways, blessed with remarkable capacities and ways to contribute to a better world. And yet the choice to love, to let ourselves truly be known, to find joy in encounter with others, remains before us. George made that choice, and he knew that joy. His wonderfully curious, leapfrogging mind, his steely commitment, and his great heart were all facets of a life that was so giving. Scripture reminds us that faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love. George knew all three, and he knew which one was the greatest. I will miss him. Well done, good and faithful servant. Amen.
Thank you, Max and Michael, who is temporarily absent, and Nicholas and Alan for reminding all of those gathered here what a great gift this life was, how capacious and anxious and expansive and welcoming and affirming George's life was. There is much to give thanks for in such a great life. So as we come into our time of prayer, we give thanks for the great diversity of traditions gathered here, I'm sure. And acknowledging that we may call upon God by many different names or by no name at all, we invite you to find that place of stillness and quiet within yourselves, and by whatever name you call upon what is eternal and holy and universal and transcendent, to find a spirit of gratitude for the richness and blessing and grace poured out in George's life. I invite you now to join me in a spirit of prayer. O Holy One, we call upon you to be generous in compassion in this time marked by the reality of absence and sorrow, but be generous in compassion as well, and raise in us a genuine sense of gratitude for the deep and rich memories that sustain us, to recall to those minds clouded by grief the blessing of your creating and redeeming love, made known to us through the lives of those whose love and wisdom, patience, mercy, wisdom, and guidance reflect your own. We call upon you to be gracious, O God, that the loss and grief may at times overshadow the joy of our living. We live and breathe that assurance that no sorrow can unbind us from the love that creates us and sustains us through all things. We call upon you, O God, in faith and in love to be present as we offer this prayer of thanksgiving for George's life. Before he was ours, he was yours. A blessing given out of your own life and made known in so many ways through his living. Through his deep love and devotion to his family, to the generations blessed by his care, his generosity of spirit. We give thanks to you as well for his keen intellect, for his incisive sense of inquiry, for his capacity to draw such a great breadth of people into the company of his friendship. We give thanks for his honorable service to community and to nation, for the simple blessing of being his friend. O Holy One, may the presence of your gracious Spirit continue to give life to these memories and to the great story of George's life. May it bring comfort and solace and peace to those who feel most deeply George's absence, and may your Spirit continue to inspire richness to flow from the memories of his life, to push back the shadows of grief and sorrow with that assurance that in a life lived fully and richly, death has no power. It cannot dampen a love that abides through all things, endures all things, remains faithful through all things. Almighty and eternal God, for the blessing of this life, for the great gift of George's life, for the promise that there remains to us a still greater life beyond this one, and for that enduring assurance that death does not bring to a close our capacity to love or to inspire love, we give you thanks. As we raise now with one voice, the prayer familiar in our tradition, but that speaks beyond us to the great hope we all share, saying together, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Our service draws to a close this afternoon with the singing of our final hymn. I invite you to rise once again to your feet or in spirit and lend your voices to Amazing Grace. It is number 546 in our blue chalice hymn.
God, we ask now for you to receive into your arms our brother George, a lamb of your own flock, a sinner of your own redemption. Wrap him in your arms, O Lord, that he may rise and join the company of the ever-blessed saints in light. O Lord, support us all the day long until the shadows lengthen and the evening comes and the busy world is hushed and the fever of life is over and our work is done. Then in thy mercy, grant us a safe lodging and a holy rest and peace at the last. Amen. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.